The atmosphere inside the Chang International Circuit felt less like a season opener and more like the set of a high-stakes psychological thriller, as the world finally witnessed the collision of two unstoppable forces. For years, the MotoGP paddock had whispered about the Toprak project, a transition that many purists claimed was a mechanical impossibility. As Toprak Razgatlioglu pulled the 7 Pramac Yamaha into the light for the first time in 2026, the silence in the garage was deafening. He wasn't just a rookie. He was a champion of another world, carrying the weight of a manufacturer that had staked its entire reputation on a radical shift in philosophy. The expectations were staggering, yet as the visor came down, the data screens began to flicker with a reality no one had anticipated. This wasn't the fairy tale start the marketing teams had promised. Instead, it was the beginning of a grueling confrontation between a rider who demands perfection and a machine that seemed determined to resist him. Every eyes-on-the-ground report suggested that the Stoppie King was finding the limits of the new M1 far sooner than the engineers had predicted. The bike, once known for its fluidity and surgical precision, now looked like a restless beast under Toprak's aggressive input. Insiders noted that the traditional smooth lines were being replaced by jagged, desperate corrections. It was a visual representation of a marriage on the brink of collapse before the first honeymoon lap was even completed. The tension wasn't just in the lap times. It was etched into the faces of the crew chiefs who realized that their star signing was fighting the equipment more than the competition. But what started as a technical struggle was about to evolve into a full-scale paddock mystery that left everyone questioning if the dream was actually a nightmare. Behind the closed curtains of the Yamaha hospitality suite, the celebrated shift to the V4 engine was beginning to look less like a revolution and more like a tactical betrayal of the rider's DNA. For decades, Yamaha's identity was built on the inline-4 suite handling, but the 2026 season demanded raw power to match the European giants. However, as the telemetry from the early rounds surfaced, it became clear that the invisible thief was at work. The new V4 power unit, while explosive on the straights, had introduced a catastrophic instability during the most critical phase of Toprak's riding, the entry to the corner. Reports from technical analysts suggested that the engine braking strategy was behaving erratically, creating a pushing sensation that neutralized Toprak's legendary late braking capability. He is a rider who lives on the front tire, pushing the laws of physics until the rear wheel is inches off the asphalt, yet the V4 was refusing to cooperate with this extreme load. According to those close to the garage, the frustration was mounting as every electronic adjustment seemed to solve one problem only to create 3 more. The carbon fiber components were vibrating under the immense torque, and the aerodynamic package, designed for high-speed stability, was making the bike feel numb in the slow-speed hairpins where Toprak usually dominates. This wasn't just a mechanical glitch, it was a fundamental mismatch between a rider's soul and a machine's logic. The paddock whispers grew louder as observers noticed Toprak's body language after each session, a mix of disbelief and simmering fire. The technical betrayal had left him exposed, stripped of his primary weapons just as the championship battle began to intensify. Yet, the real shock wasn't the failure of the engine. It was how far the team was willing to go to fix it, leading to a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the project. As the series moved toward the Americas, the thin veil of professional composure finally snapped, revealing a garage environment that several insiders described as a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion. It was during the Friday practice sessions in Texas that the world saw a side of Toprak rarely captured by the cameras, a champion furious not with his own performance, but with a technical package that felt like a set of golden handcuffs. Confrontation wasn't loud, but the intensity was unmistakable. Toprak was seen in heated discussions with his crew chief, pointing aggressively at the front-end assembly. The core of the dispute centered on the bike's ergonomics and its refusal to stop. At 1.85 meters tall, Toprak is a physical outlier in a sport built for smaller frames, and the 2026 Yamaha seemed to have been designed with a one-size-fits-all philosophy that ignored his unique leverage requirements. Rumors began to circulate that Toprak had issued a stern ultimatum: either the bike changes or the results never will. This wasn't just about a seat height adjustment, it was about the soul of the development path. The Japanese engineers, traditionally conservative and methodical, were suddenly being pushed by a rider who demanded radical, immediate surgery on the chassis. The tension reached a crisis point when speculation emerged that a rival manufacturer had already made a checking phone call to Toprak's management, sensing the blood in the water. The paddock was abuzz with the possibility that the most high-profile transfer in a decade could end in a spectacular early termination. The weight of expectation was crushing, and for the first time, the unstoppable label felt like a cruel irony. However, just as the critics began to sharpen their pens for an obituary of his MotoGP career, the narrative took a sharp, jagged turn that no one in the pit lane saw coming. The French Grand Prix at Le Mans is often where championships find their clarity, But in 2026, it became the site of a technical rebellion that blurred the lines between innovation and desperation. Under the grey skis of France, the Pramac Yamaha garage underwent a transformation that many believed was a direct response to Toprak's fury. The team decided to stop playing it safe within the confines of the standard development cycle. According to paddock insiders, a secret technical overhaul was implemented overnight, involving a highly controversial manipulation of the weight distribution and a new rear-end aerodynamic configuration. This wasn't a factory-sanctioned update. It was a field-expedient solution designed to give Toprak the mechanical support he had been screaming for. The paddock erupted in speculation as the 7 bike began to exhibit a completely different profile on the brakes. The gray zone of the FIM regulations was being tested to its absolute limit, with rival manufacturers like Ducati and KTM reportedly requesting an official clarification on the legality of the new aerofins located near the swing arm. The air in the pit lane was thick with accusation, with some believing Yamaha had finally abandoned their honor to keep their star rider from walking away. But the drama in the garage was nothing compared to what was happening on the asphalt. Toprak wasn't just riding the bike, he was punishing it. He was taking lines that defied the logic of the V4 engine, forcing the machine into corners with a level of violence that seemed certain to end in a high-speed incident. The Le Mans rebellion wasn't just about parts, it was about a rider reclaiming his agency from the engineers. The stakes had been raised to a level of extreme volatility, and the entire paddock held its breath as the lights went out, waiting to see if this Frankenstein bike would hold together or shatter under the pressure. What the world witnessed in the closing stages of the French GP was no longer a race. It was a psychological masterclass that proved the most powerful component of the 7 machine wasn't the V4 engine, but the mind of the man controlling it. Despite the lingering mechanical flaws and the ongoing technical controversies, Toprak reached a state of defiant flow that left the commentary box in a state of shock. He had reached a point where he stopped trying to ride the M1 like a traditional MotoGP prototype and started treating it like a weapon of war. The unstoppable factor had finally surfaced, but it wasn't because the bike had become perfect. It was because Toprak had accepted its imperfections and decided to override them through sheer, brutal will. Insiders reported that his telemetry showed brake pressures that should have resulted in an immediate front-end collapse, yet he kept the bike upright through a series of controlled slides that looked more like dirt track racing than Grand Prix competition. This was the twist the paddock didn't expect. The fury hadn't burned him out. It had forged a new, more dangerous version of the rider. He was ignoring the safe electronic maps, manually managing the traction with a finesse that made the most advanced computers in the world look obsolete. The psychological impact on his rivals was devastating. Seeing a rider on an inferior and troubled machine dive bombing into corners from impossible distances broke the spirit of the lead pack. The rumors of his demise were not only premature, they were laughable. He was proving that while you can break a motorcycle, you cannot break a rider who has nothing left to lose. The tension in the paddock shifted from will he quit to how can anyone stop this, as the realization set in that a frustrated Toprak is the most terrifying entity in motorsports. As the dust settled over the Le Mans podium, the final verdict of the weekend sent a chilling message through the paddock. The Yamaha problem was far from solved, but Toprak Razgatlioglu had rendered the problem irrelevant. The fallout from the weekend's performance was immediate and far-reaching. While the official reports will focus on the points haul, the real story lies in the shifting power dynamics within the technical regulations. The rebellion updates were ultimately deemed legal, but the controversy has sparked a renewed debate about how much a rider should be allowed to override the intended safety parameters of a machine. Looking ahead to the 2027 season, the shadows are already growing long. The impending switch to Pirelli tires, a brand Toprak knows better than perhaps any other rider on the planet, suggests that this current struggle is merely a training weight for a future era of total dominance. Insiders believe that if he can be this unstoppable on a bike he openly hates, the rest of the grid is in serious trouble when the regulations eventually swing back toward his natural strengths. The furious version of 7 has redefined what it means to be a factory rider. He is no longer just an employee of a brand, but a force of nature that the brand must learn to survive. The 2026 narrative has been permanently altered. It is no longer a story about a manufacturer trying to build a winning bike. It is a story about a manufacturer trying to keep up with a rider who is already miles ahead in his own mind. The shock hasn't worn off, and as the series heads toward the next round, the question remains. If a broken Yamaha can't stop him, what happens when they finally get it right? The answer is a terrifying prospect for everyone else in the pit lane.